Okay, good morning again, or good afternoon to everyone who is in attendance. We want to thank you for being here at our third, well, not third per se, but third out of this year webinar under the JAM 706 project. That's in cooperation with the IAEA and the Water Resources Authority, looking at isotopes in the Rio Bueno sub-WMU. We had two webinars earlier this month, which were well supported on March 14 and March 16, looking at stable isotopes in precipitation and stable isotopes in the Rio Bueno. We're building on to that now today, looking at the presentation on assessing Karst vulnerability using GIS. This will be presented by Dr. Christos Pennos. He's here right now. And without further ado, we will begin. Although before we begin, I just want to acknowledge the presence of my colleague and my good friend, Anika Cole, Nee Sutherland. I want to shout out, she was a chief hydrologist before me, and I appreciate her service and her presence here. So over to you, Dr. Christos.
Yeah, hello everyone. Let me share my screen. Okay, can someone tell me which screen? I have two screens now, and it is a little bit confusing. Can someone just
the screen, it says yeah, the title screen, Deciphering Karst Aquifer Vulnerability Using GIS Techniques.
Okay, great. Thank you, Geoffrey. So the title says it all. I mean, the title describes the topic of this webinar. So what we are trying to see today is how to decipher Karst aquifer vulnerability using GIS techniques. Before I start my presentation, I cannot. Okay. I just want to show you just a brief, the outline of the presentation. In the first part of the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the karstic aquifers. And the second part, we will focus on the EPIC methodology, the methodology that we are going to see and explore today. And finally, I will present you an example from Northern Norway. That's something that we've done here during the past months. Rearrange the windows here because it's a small mess with two screens. So this figure and the following figure are from this paper, Water Vulnerability Assessment in Karst Environments by Dorfliger et al. And here in this figure, we can see like a representation, a conceptual model of how Karst aquifer actually look like. So the Karst aquifers are generally considered to be particularly vulnerable to pollution, and this is because of their unique structure that is shown here. I guess all of you are familiar with this sketch here. On the upper part of the aquifer, most of the times we have soil lying above the bedrock. Sometimes this soil layer is really thin. Sometimes it is absent. Below the soil layer, there is the epikarst part of the aquifer, which is actually the upper part of the karstified bedrock. And sometimes in this epikarst zone, we have this hanging saturated zone. So there is some water that is sometimes burst here, and that is filling up the epikarst zone. Following, we have the non-saturated zone, which is also called, and usually you can find it as named as Vado zone, which is a low permeability, where we have low permeability, and most of the flow, it is happening through this karstic conduits. So it is a linear flow taking place through karstic conduits. And finally, we have the saturated zone, which is called phreatic zone as well, where we have low permeability, and the rock might be fissures and might have some karstic conduits, or there is conduits that might have not been well developed yet. Here we can see in this sketch some the basic parts of the karstic aquifer, of the karstic bedrock, the exokarst, the epikarst, and the endokarst. It is what I was trying to describe to you later. So the exokarst is the karst that is sticking out. It is part of the epikarst, but it's sticking out of the soil. So it is the part of the epikarst that is not covered with soil. So the epikarst might be the part that is also covered by soil, but it's the part that is close to the surface. And the endokarst is the part of the karstified bedrock that it lies below the epikarst. Excuse me. So in the karstic aquifers, we have two different flow settings. We have the base flow, that is the flow which is mainly fed by the water from low permeability volumes. And we have also the flooding flow that occurs during flood period. So the base flow is usually a slow flow, where the flooding flow, it is a fast flow. And you can see it here in this sketch. With green, you can see the parts that are representing the fast flow, and with yellow, the areas where the slow flow is occurring. So from these parts where we have the slow flow, we have the base, the basic, let's say, recharge of the aquifer through these yellow arrows, yellow bars here, where when we have the fast flow, we have this fast flow is occurring mostly during the flooding period, where water from rainfall events infiltrates into the conduits. As we actually discussed before, three are the main parts that can be distinguished in these karst aquifers, and the vulnerability depends on the residence time in the different parts of the aquifer. So in the endokarst, where we have a conduit network and low permeability volumes, the flow velocity in this karst conduits is low, and we have a well-developed conduit network that suggests high vulnerability. In the epikarst area, where the part of the water is mostly stored and slowly released, we have a low vulnerability. Suggests low vulnerability for the karstic conduit, and then we have the protective cover, which is actually represented by sediments or soil that is sitting on top of the epikarst zone. Now, I think that we should actually consider a lot is the distinctions between the three parts. The distinctions between these three parts is meaningful when the recharge is diffuse. It is a diffuse discharge over the catchment. But if in some cases there are cases actually where the discharge is concentrated through features like sinkholes, and the water infiltrates directly into the endokarst conduit network. So in this case, where we have a concentrated recharge of the aquifer through sinkholes, so nothing of this actually, nothing. This whole classification has no meaning in terms of vulnerability. Now, what about the EPIC methodology? EPIC is a method that assesses the vulnerability of waters of a karstic spring over the catchment, and it is based on the conceptual model. It is widely used by many scientists. Here I made a short Google search, and it turns out that there are more than almost 9,000 papers that they came out with cases where papers that are dealing with EPIC methodology. It is, if you're not familiar with this, it is a multi-attribute weighting rating methodology, and it uses epicars, protective cover, infiltration condition, and karst network development. And these are the 4 attributes that actually are being used in order to apply this methodology. And we are going to see how we can do that and actually dig a little bit into the methodology. So the most crucial part for applying EPIC methodology is to define the boundaries of the catchment, or in this case, I don't know if the term catchment is totally correct in a sense that actually the catchment area might be bigger, but we only care about the part of the catchment, the area that contributes into the recharge of the aquifer. So yeah. So in order to do this, we must have a good knowledge of the geology, the hydrogeology, and ideally have done some tracer tests in order to define the catchment area. Here I'm showing you this example from northern Norway. The area here that is marked as yellow, orange, this area is the catchment area. It's actually the area that feeds the aquifer, that from which the aquifer is recharged, but the catchment of the karstic aquifer is defined by this purple line. So you can see that it is not a good overlapping between the catchment area and the area that it is feeding the aquifer. So, as I said before, there are 4 attributes that have to be assessed and measured, and of course mapped, since we are using this spatial classification for our catchment, for our area. The evaluation is semi-quantitative, and by means of classes assigned by numbered values. So, as we discussed before, it is the epicars, the protective cover, infiltration condition, and karstic network development. So, what we are going to get is a map like this one, and on this map we can see the spatial distribution of the vulnerability, where we can determine different vulnerability classes respectively to the different protection zones. So in this map you can see that we have different areas that present high, very high with red, high with purple, and moderate vulnerability with yellow colors. So let's talk about the first attribute, which is attribute E, as it comes from this acronym, the EPIC, and corresponds to epikarst. So as I said before, epikarst is the zone that is located under the consolidated soil. If there is no soil, the morphological features associated with epikarst are essentially current fields like this here, or they might be dry valleys like this photo here, and there is no real classification or investigation tools that can allow recognition and mapping of different types of these epikarst zones. But because the epikarst can be heterogeneous over over the aerial distribution of the Karst Aquifer, and therefore I think it is difficult to assign detailed classes to different epikarst zones. For example, they might be well-developed epikarsts connected to the karst network, or developed but not connected to the karst network. Or they might have also, in some cases, we might not have epikarst at all. But for this reason, and let's say as a first step to address these difficulties, the epikarst zone is characterized indirectly based only on geomorphological features that can be easily mapped, and they can be easily mapped using GIS techniques, because that's the main issue here, to apply these GIS techniques and to avoid as much as we can to spend our time on the field in order to have a fast assessment of the vulnerability of the area that we are interested in, right? So the attribute classes for epikarsts are shown here. So we might have highly developed epikarsts, as I said, moderately developed, or it might be even small or absent. And if it is highly developed, it can get this value E1, E2, and E3 respectively. Excuse me. The second attribute is the attribute P from epikarst again. This corresponds to the protective cover. In this attribute, we include both soil and other geological layers that might be sitting on top of the karstic aquifer, like quaternary deposits or whatever, less glacial till, debris, rocks, everything. Like we can see this picture here with our L4 scale. So here we have debris, glacial debris sitting on top of the karstic aquifer, of the karstic rock, where here we have something that looks like soil. I mean, it's not very well developed, and it's not thick at all, but I mean, there is some soil in this picture, believe it or not. This attribute, again, it can be characterized by P1 to P4 numbers, where P1 means that soil or protective cover. So sometimes I might be referring to it as soil, or I mean, instead of using the protective cover term, but I think that it is more correct to use the protective cover term, because it also corresponds in another type of geological layers. So if there is no cover at all, or we have up to 20 centimeters of soil, we classify the area as P1, where 20 to 100 centimeters of soil, they classify the area as P2, 100 to 200 centimeters of soil like P3, and more than 2 meters of soil, we classify the area as P4. So for this attribute, the higher, the thicker the cover, the protective cover, the lower the vulnerability for the karstic aquifer. Now we move on to the infiltration conditions. This attribute concerns the type of the recharge to the aquifer. It doesn't include the recharge in terms of quantity or location. Diffuse and concentrated recharge have different vulnerability inferences. 4 infiltration classes are identified here: concentrated, diffuse, and an intermediate class where runoff may be important, and finally is the rest of the catchment that has no implication on the recharge of the aquifer. One important thing is that we should recognize the concentrated recharge points. And this is something that is relatively straightforward, especially for karstic setting. The characteristics of water runoff at the surface of the catchment area have to be identified in order to assign the areas of the watershed for each class of this infiltration characterization. Surface runoff tends to concentrate flow that results in higher vulnerability. And the runoff coefficient depends on the slope and the vegetation. So steep floats and steep slopes and poor vegetation results in higher vulnerability, of course. And this is because we assume that there is more runoff that will infiltrate in the low relief areas, right? And according to the values of runoff coefficient that are established by Sautier in 1984, I think, there's a paper. The value that is distinguishing different runoff coefficient values is assigned it is assigned as very low for meadows. I can't remember the numbers by heart, and it is a little bit higher for cultivated fields. So, I mean, this can also have an impact on the runoff. So, the characterization, of course, of, as I said, of infiltration conditions needs to obtain data and classify each area of the catchment that require, and this requires studying topographic maps. This is easy if we are going to use these GIS systems. And of course, today we can skip studying these topographic maps, but instead we can use the DM models or the terrain models that we have in our disposal, either from, I don't know, drone photography or satellite imaging or whatever, LiDAR scanning, everything. So finally, we've reached the Karst attribute K, which is actually corresponds to the Karst network development. So how well developed is the Karst network, that it is lying inside the bedrock, or it is lying in the endokarst part of the aquifer. So we might have a karstic network like something that looks like this big, huge cave with a river running through it, and it has this extent of a few tens of kilometers. Or we might have a karstic network that looks like what we can see in this picture here, where we have some small corridors that are formed almost vertically here. And again, the Karst network is characterized, classified, it has three classes in order to classify this attribute. So class K1 corresponds to well-developed Karst network. Class K2 corresponds to a poorly developed Karst network, and class K3 corresponds to a mixed or fissured aquifer. So something here that we cannot say that we have a well-developed karstic network, or it might be non-karstic at all. So another thing, especially for the karstic network, because in order to have data about what is lying under inside the bedrock, and if we have no access into, let's say, caving maps or caving data at all, a good way to determine if we have developed karstic network, it is to do a small short-term discharge analysis or a long-term discharge analysis. So this can help us see if we have a well-developed network. For example, if in our spring we have a from 2 to 24 hours response of changes in the discharge that correspond to precipitation changes from 15 to 25 millimeters, that suggests that we have something there. Maybe we have a well-developed karstic network. Another way, instead of discharging, and this year actually can relate with the work that Aurel is doing together with the stable isotopes, together with Geoffrey, is the artificial tracer test. Okay, we're not in their case, they are not doing tracing in census 3.2, but we are using isotopes that they can tell us something about the residence time and how long do they spend inside the aquifer and how big is the aquifer, and all of this information that Aurel was describing in his previous webinar. So for the case of Jamaica, I think that it is, if there is no big like or detailed cave inventory for the area that you are working, I think that the stable isotopes analysis that is happening right now, it can actually give us good insights about the on how well the karstic network is developed in the area. And now, if we say that we were able to collect all these these values for the different attributes about the EPIC methodology, we have to see what we are going to do. Actually the EPIC methodology, this whole methodology, is described by this small equation here. Here you can see the different attributes E, P, I, and K that are weighted based on how important are these attributes for the vulnerability of the aquifer. And the weight index for its attribute, it is actually developed by some empirical tests and observations that actually were there for many years. Like in summary, we can say that the epikarst and infiltration conditions cannot play an important protection role on the karst groundwater. So epikarst and infiltration here, they're not so important for the protection of the role of the karst groundwater. That's why they are getting this high weight index number 3, where karst is somehow important, how well the karstic area is developed. And of course, as I said before, the most crucial attribute is the protective cover. So that's why it is weighted with 1. So what I forgot to say is that low F values corresponds to high vulnerability. That's why these are weighted with number 3 and 2, where this one is weighted with number 1. Yeah, here is the table where the relative weights are shown. And now let's, because I think that this might have been a little bit confusing. Let's move on the example from Northern Norway. So the area, the catchment area that we applied this methodology lies somewhere here up in Mo i Rana. It is a little bit below the Arctic Circle, so the Arctic Circle should be somewhere here. The catchment area is shown by this red dot here, and by blue color here in this figure. So what we did, how we defined the Karst parameter. First thing we've done is we performed field work in the area. We've been there. We tried to map using like a GPS, a small GPS to map any doe lines or any current that we could find in the area here. So that involved a lot of walking. And then we used this high resolution digital terrain model that we acquired by this Hoide Data. It's an agency here in Norway. The terrain model has a vertical resolution of 0.5 meters, so half a meter. That means that features that they are below this, they are smaller than half a meter. We weren't able to detect them, but using this into GIS here, and by applying this field tool, we were able to extract all the doe lines of the area. We found that what we've done here, it is actually in really good correspondence with the field data that we've collected. So, and for some points, actually, we got better results using the DM than to walk there on the field. And of course, that was much faster procedure. So it took only, I don't know, maybe 10, no, I don't know, few minutes, in a few minutes, we were able to extract this, all the depressions that we were lying in the catchment area. So when we extracted this, we generated this map, we generated a raster file, and we, based on the vector data that we extracted, that were delimiting the depressions, we generated a raster file, and we gave and that raster file had the resolution of 0.5 times 0.5 meters. And this is crucial because this number, we use this number for its raster dataset that we created. And we did that because we wanted to have high, this number was actually defined by the raster dataset with a higher resolution. So the raster dataset with a higher resolution defined the resolution that the rest of the datasets that we produced we're going to have. So for the protective cover parameter, here we had no cover data information. We couldn't find any data that they could give us an idea on how thick the soil, all of the geological layers that are sitting above the bedrock were. So what we did was that we downloaded and we used the vegetation data, again from this is an agency, Norwegian agency, and we use the vegetation cover as an indication of the soil thickness. So areas that we had meadows or grass. We made the assumption that these areas, they have really thin soil cover there, where in areas that we can find tree or in forest, we assigned higher soil values. And of course, there are some areas that they were bare bedrock, so there was no soil. And these are shown here with light gray. So for this, we use this data set as a background, and we digitized the different areas, and we gave to each area a different p-value as we described it before. So here there was a lot of manual labor included, but we believe that we were able to acquire one really detailed map. After that, we again used the digital elevation model in order to extract the superficial drainage network, because we thought that the areas where the water is concentrated is the areas where we have higher infiltration into the ground. So the stream lines, the river lines, are the lines that actually they were used actually for to assign high infiltration values, where the rest of the catchment was used as it was assigned with value number 4. So keep in mind that this area here doesn't present high slope values, as you can see. So it is a relatively flat area with really low slope values, and that's why we use that the rivers as the lines where we have higher infiltration. So if the rivers or the drainage network of a catchment, if we had a catchment that it had high slope values, then obviously the rivers and the drainage network in general could not be used as the areas that have high infiltration values, because there we have high runoff of the water. And finally, we use for the Karst for attribute K about the Karst network development. We used cave maps. We think that we have very good knowledge of the area, and there are only 4 caves here. The caves were digitized. The cave maps were georeferenced, and the caves were digitized using this GIS software, and you can see them here with red color. So, and then we applied like a buffer zone just because we are uncertain what is the real extent of the cave, and not the one that not only because cave it's not only the corridors that we can explore, but there might be corridors that are smaller for human to pass through. So we applied a buffer zone into this cave area, which can be seen here with blue. And we assigned this one as a well-developed Karst network, and this as a not as well-developed Karst network. Of course, there is Karst here. It might be a karstic network line here, but we are not so sure about that, so we had no indication about this. So now what? So we got all these 4 raster datasets here, E, P, I, and K, and we try to import those in this equation, the epic equation that I showed you before. In order to do this, again, we used our GIS. We actually used this raster calculator. It's a super easy procedure because it is actually based on Boolean, in simple algebra, not in Boolean, but in single algebra here. Of course, you can make some Boolean algebra analysis, but yeah, it's so simple. This equation was so simple. So we assigned the number of the output raster, and then we gave this weighted index in its raster file that corresponding to the different epic attributes. And after we ran the software, we got a raster that looked like this thing. And we classified the different values that we got. And we classified them following the classification that is introduced by Droiter et al. Concerning the epic methodology. So with red color, we can see areas that he present they present very high vulnerability, with purple areas with low vulnerability, and with yellow areas that they have this moderate vulnerability. So I forgot to mention that this tool that we use here, for those of you that you're not familiar with ArcGIS, it actually uses, it makes a calculation using, calculates runs the equation that we are assigning, we are defining here in a pixel to pixel basis. So it uses the raster data sets should be identical, or at least one should be overlapping the other, and then the software will find each pixel from each raster that corresponds to the other ones, and it will run the equation that that we are assigning to. So back to the epic application. Here is our output map, and these are the individual maps for its attribute. So what you can see here is how its attribute, what is the role that its attribute plays on how vulnerable is our aquifer. This stands for the epicast, and here you can see that all the areas that are found here, these small depressions, all the depressions that we found here are actually orange. They are giving high vulnerability values. So the epicast is actually playing a role in this catchment. But the biggest the protection cover, it doesn't play such a big role in the vulnerability of this aquifer. As you can see here, these colors, these high values, they do not really correspond well with any of these areas, apart maybe this part here that it shows up here, where it has this high vulnerability value. And then here, unfortunately, I think that you cannot see, but you cannot see it really well. But the pink colors that are actually defining the drainage network can be seen here either as purple ones here, or as deep red here. Like in areas where these two parameters, the infiltration and the epicast, are meeting, we have areas that are really vulnerable. And here as well, but here is the result of epicast and extensive karst network. So here we have epicast development, no soil, almost no soil. This corresponds, the color here, this purple, not purple, but pink color, corresponds to areas that have no soil. So there is barren rock here. And here we have barren, the combination between barren rock, small epikarst features, and extremely well-developed karstic network. So there are a lot of there are 4 caves here, as I showed you before. That's why here we have this a very high, a very vulnerable area here that sticks out here. So closing my presentation, what is the takeout message from this presentation is that EPIC is an approach for delineating groundwater protection areas in karst environments, of course, based on the vulnerability mapping that effectively complements the complex hydrological behavior of the karst system. So what we have to keep in mind is that from hydrological point of view, karstic systems are really complex, and all these this EPIC and other similar methodologies that might exist there, they are actually a simplification, and but a very good simplification with that can be applied really fast. And this is what we should keep in mind, that it is a really fast application to understand how vulnerable a karstic system is. Now, of course, there are these drawbacks that the characterization of the IP karst needs improved and direct methods such as infiltration tests. We discussed about that, artificial tracer tests and geophysics. The epikarst is a gray box. We don't really understand. We know, but we cannot fully understand what is happening in the epikarst. Of course, the protective cover, and especially soil, they need we need to understand the characteristics such as cation exchange capacity and anion exchange capacity, just to be sure what is how the soil reacts with the infiltrating water. The EPIC methodology doesn't consider some dynamic characteristics of the aquifer, such as temporal variations on the infiltration. So we should also keep in mind, if we have high variations on the infiltration that are related to different epochs, this won't be shown in EPIC, applying the EPIC methodology. But the good thing is that this GIS methodology simplifies the construction of a vulnerability map, and of course we are using this by using these digital topographic models as DMs, etc. It's super fast, super easy, and you don't really need to be on the field to generate a vulnerability map. Of course, the more time one will spend on the field, the better will constrain all these uncertainties that we were describing before about this methodology. So that's it, and thank you. Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much, Christos, for that very interesting presentation. There are many questions, I'm sure, popping up in the chat, and also that people might want to ask directly. So at this time, if you have a question, I'll ask you to use the raise hand feature or place your question in the chat. In the meantime, I saw a couple of questions in the chat. I'm just going to try to go through so I can go through those in the order that they came, while persons raise their hands to ask the questions. Otherwise, one observation, well, one question I had that, well, let me go through the chat first before I talk about my questions.
Yeah.
The question by Peter Gay Harris had said, how are fault systems represented in this vulnerability assessment method?
Yeah, like that's a really good question. I don't know, but one should actually improvise into this. So for me, if I had a case like this where we have a fractured aquifer, I would actually try to plot these fault lines or joints or discontinuities, whatever, these lineaments, as areas where we have high epikarst values. I mean, this is what I was going to do. Of course, it's like it is not so clear in this using the epic methodology, but so this is what I should do. So I guess that everyone should improvise a little bit while using this kind of methodologies. And this is why actually there are so many, if I can use the term, spin-offs from epic. So there are so many other methodologies that they are based on epic, but the people have shifted them a little bit, and they are in order to make them more, to adjust them better for the area that they are working. For example, I know that in some colleagues in Greece and in France, they have developed this methodology that they call it paprika, and I don't know why all of them, they are using these funny names, or at least they sound funny to me. But they have developed this methodology that they call it paprika, and which is more well developed, more well adjusted for the geology in the southern France and Greece.
Okay,
So I hope I covered. Yeah.
So epic seems to be very you can adjust it or modify it for your specific purpose or your region.
Yeah, I mean, this is what most of the people are doing. Like, yeah.
Okay.
You can add a different weight for one of the attributes. You may add a different attribute if you want. You can split an attribute into two. Like, I don't know. Yeah, you can do all of these things. I mean, this is quite common actually.
Okay. Other question that came in the chat from Trisha: what's the lowest resolution beyond which she meant DEM? She said DTM, but the DEM will no longer be appropriate for the analysis.
Yeah. So I mean, it depends again on what kind of depressions do you want to detect, because this is the area where we are using the most the DTM on identifying the depressions. So yeah, I mean, the higher the resolution, the better, because you can actually define really small depressions or shafts that they might be, cave shafts that they might be there. That's why you need to go on the field and decide how good are the results that the GIS analysis is yielding. So yeah, I would say like that a DTM with a spatial resolution of 0.5 meters is actually really good.
Okay, thanks. To answer Trisha's other question, how does this compare with the drastic method? Both this and the drastic seem to follow the same general principle of a weight multiplied by your assessment of what that feature is. Just that the drastic uses different parameters, different inputs as opposed to epic. So what we could do is, if we do an epic assessment, you can compare it to a drastic assessment and see what correlations are there within the same, but they're both.
That actually will be really interesting to see, actually. Yeah. To compare these two different methodologies.
We did a drastic assessment of the island a couple of years back. It was finished, not published, but it was finished with results, so that could be compared here. All right, okay. I see two hands. All right, I'll ask Oliver to go first and then Shanti. Let me ask unmute.
Yes, thank you very much. Christos, I have one question on your last slide, point 2. You demonstrated that other investigations might be needed. So like estimating the cation exchange capacity, infiltration capacity, and so on. Anion exchange capacity. How does this quantitatively feed back into the EPIC method? So I understand this qualitatively, of course it's related, but how does this feed back into the EPIC calculation in numbers?
Okay, this should go in this adjustment of the EPIC methodology again. If we have this kind of data, then we can adjust the protective cover attribute into something. You get what I'm saying? Because then now we are going a step above on what EPIC can handle. So we should adjust that. So I guess this is why we have so many variants, I might say, if I can say, from of this EPIC methodology of the EPIC formula equation. So again, the more data we have, the more adjustments we are able to do on the core, on the EPIC core, because that's actually, this is the EPIC, this is the core of methodology, and then we can based on
so basically, I mean, in the first part of the presentation, you had these tables for example, classifying the epicast, and there were some characteristics saying this leads to an epicast classification in category 1, 2, 3, I think. So you mean if I have a better understanding of the ion exchange capacity of the epicast, this can guide me into a different level in this table?
Yeah, and you can, and one can actually change this this table, the values of this table. I mean, it can. It is not like that this table is constraining us on what. This is just the basic, like the core, as I said. So I guess it will be different if we have a soil cover that it is high anion capacity with the soil cover that it has a high cation capacity, right? So
I understand. Maybe it would be great with last presentation of Oral, we discussed a bit afterwards, and I think Oral updated a bit his presentation with some additional slides. So I think it could be great if you could find something like a table that tells us how we come from these quantitative parameters to another classification. If you could find a table or literature link.
I mean, this is not clearly quantitative application. It's more like qualitative. Although we are assigning values, it is a qualitative thing.
Okay. But if you could find something that tells us, if I have a high cation exchange capacity, whatever, then I conclude epicast is more in this or that category. Like you have it with the table that you have in the first part of your presentation, where it was mainly about, I think, thickness of the layer. Would be great.
I mean,
if this exists, I don't know.
Yeah, we can work something out. I mean, it's quite common, at least. So,
okay. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks so much, Oliver. Shanti, you can ask your question now.
Yes, thank you, Jeffrey. Just a few comments on the Jamaican context. We do have areas of very well developed cockpit karst, as well as degraded karst. But in addition to Peter Gay's comment about how you would treat with faults, we also have horst and graben structures in some of the valleys, which originates in the sort of karst terrain. So I think, it's an interesting case. We're always thinking about how this would be applied in Jamaica. There is some, just to follow up on your last point, though, there is some CEC data I know from our agricultural activities and agricultural sectors. So perhaps that might be something that we could have an idea of what the situation is in Jamaica.
Okay, thank you much.
But if I can add something like this fault thing. I mean, you can add like another attribute on the EPIC methodology, and I guess it should be something like fault attribute, also we can call it lineaments attribute or whatever, and this should be an attribute that will be weighted really low, like with 1 maybe, again, because faults can give access to water to penetrate directly on the Karst Aquifer without infiltrating it. So I guess you can make a method, a new equation called EPIC-F or FEPIC, just to make it sound better, or LEPIC with lineaments, whatever. And you can give to this first letter a very low weight index. I mean, that should be something that, I mean, it makes sense, at least to me right now. So I haven't really thought about it, but yeah.
Okay, Shanti has another comment, again, a response to that.
Yes, just to come back, Christos, what it is, it seems like our groundwater flows are more fault controlled rather than the karst. We've done some hydrogeological modeling, and even a number of tracer testing that has been recently done by the IAEA seem to point that where we know the fault lineations are, there seems to be quite a strong control. The thing with the karst in Jamaica, as far as I can reflect on it, it is quite fractured. We really have no idea of direct routes of infiltration. It seems to really take a kind of convoluted pathway to end up where it comes to surface and where it empties.
Okay. Well, I have a quick comment on that, because it's true that we've done diatrace tests that show the relatively rapid flow from certain sinking rivers to the other rivers in that WMU, especially the Rio Bueno. At the same time, the first slide that Christos showed had an interesting point where you had the slow infiltration of groundwater going down into the conduit, into the flow, into the phreatic zone, and then also along with the direct conduit flow. When you look at the outflow, the discharge of the Rio Bueno, for example, while we do see the rapid flows of Kwashi Cave and Low River, comparatively rapid within days or weeks, within 1 week or so coming out there, you also see the volume of flow that's coming from Darnaked, which is much more than the combined flow of those rivers going in. So that high base flow is also a reflection of that groundwater discharge, which must be coming from the large discharge or the large storage that's going on within the aquifer. The isotope data that Aurel showed from in the last 2 presentations also showed that interaction of how the groundwater in the groundwater samples were not really reflecting at that point in time the impact from precipitation. So that the lag is still to be examined, because it could be like about 2-3 months, and the data we're looking at will show that. But the conduit, there's a combination of conduit flow and, so to speak, groundwater storage discharge happening in the basin. I think by the time this project is completed, we should have a much better idea as to how exactly all of this interacts and comes together between surface recharge and groundwater discharge to springs and base flow. One other question I had, Christos, the vegetation, you kind of mentioned it when you talked about vegetation as a proxy for soil cover, because that's a bit of a challenge. What would you say if, and Shanti pointed out in the chat also that in our situation, it may be that the high forest cover may not necessarily translate into thick soil cover based on what we have here. So how exactly can you use vegetation as a proxy?
Yeah, we use this as a proxy for our area, that we had a lot of field data on our disposal, because we've been there so many times before, and we knew that we know that in areas where we have these thick forest growing. We have a lot of soil, thick layer of soil, where in meadows or grasslands, open grasslands, we have really low short soil coverage, low soil coverage. So for tropical type of vegetation like it is in Jamaica, I don't know what I cannot tell. I don't know what is the case. If you can use this the type of vegetation as a direct proxy for soil coverage. I've just mentioned that for our case study here in northern Norway.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a really, I mean, it is a really good observation that you guys had. But yeah, I don't know. I guess you can actually you can somehow have a control on this if you go on the field and check. I mean, or if you guys can discuss with people that they are experts on I don't know, on plants and trees and etc. So what is the minimum thickness that a tree of a certain tree type needs to grow or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, understandable. Yeah, because I was saying in the chat, you might have to do field tests, go there with an auger and say, okay, in this area, it's like that. Using a land use map or things like that would also be very helpful. It seems to me that the main thing that EPIC is location dependent. You have to see what are the values in your area. And like I said, what works for you. And my last question, it's, yes, Shanti, they have the forest cover and all kind of thing as well for that shapefile. I think that would be a very good assist for our own purposes. And the vulnerability classification, you said is qualitative. So you're there, you have a range, but that range is for that assessment only. You will be saying that this region is more vulnerable when compared to this region in this particular study, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's exactly.
So you would you be able to compare it to somewhere else or?
Yeah, I mean, like I wouldn't do a comparison between Norway and Jamaica. Or like, you know what I mean, different, I would compare areas that they have more or less similar characteristics. So yeah, I mean, you can compare, let's say, areas in the Mediterranean, but yeah, you cannot directly compare the EPIC results between areas from the Mediterranean to, let's say, Northern Europe or I don't know, Arctic regions.
Okay, understood. All right, thanks so much. Are there any other questions from the audience? Shanti points out that we are very proud of our international type section for cockpit cars. The name of the location is Hungary. Yes, we are setting the trend here. Well, if there are no further questions, I would like to thank you, Dr. Pennos, for your presentation. It was much appreciated. I give recognition as well to Aurel, Dr. Persoy, and to Oliver from IAEA for their support in chairing and co-leading in this project. Thank you as well to all of you who attended from various places. We had 31 attendees. I'm really happy to see that. And I look forward to your continued support as we continue with this. Our next and final, well, not final as in absolute last, but our capstone webinar for this particular section of the project will be held on April 11, Monday, April 11 at 9 a.m. Jamaica time, 3 p.m. Vienna time. And it will be a joint presentation between Aurel and Christos looking at the data collected so far. So we're putting everything together that we've done in the last 3 webinars into this one webinar. You cannot afford to miss it. So thank you again for being here. The recording will be shared as well. If you need a copy, just send me an email at gmarshall@ra.gov.jm. And have a great day, everyone. Thanks much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.